present topic now is going to be refuge, and refuge is considered, the foundation of the Buddhist path. So I want to talk about refuge kind of just more generally, and then I'll speak of it in its role and kind of ritual role, practical role, all those kind of roles that it can be talked about from a traditional Buddhist path. So in that, my first thought was to give like a more traditional like breakdown of, there's a traditional way of talking about this. There's the person that takes refuge. There's the that to which they go for refuge, how they go for refuge, the benefits of going for refuge, training in refuge, all these kind of things. And I'll talk about that a bit later. But before we get into those kind of traditional topics, I want to talk just about refuge in general. So what does it even mean, and what's the point? So everyone, according to Buddhism, wants happiness and doesn't want to suffer. And in their pursuit of happiness, they engage in all kinds of things. Some things that may be pragmatic and effective in actually ensuring happiness, but oftentimes most of the things that we're doing that we think are going to make us happy actually don't. And there's a famous quote from Shantideva that says, even though beings wish for happiness, they don't understand its causes, and then they end up destroying their own happiness as if it was their very enemy, something like that, because they don't understand actually what's the cause of happiness and what's the cause of suffering. So if we're actually trying to overcome suffering, and not right now, I'm just speaking on a practical level for ourselves. We can talk about this more universalist attitude of bodhicitta more later, but for now, just even thinking about ourselves. If we want to overcome suffering, if we want to gain happiness, then we have to know how to do that. We have to know actually what's going to ensure that happiness. And maybe we even need to know further, what is happiness, and explore that topic some more. So we find ourselves, seeking happiness in all kinds of ways and trying to avoid discomfort or suffering in all kinds of ways. And everything that we do from one perspective, we could call that taking refuge. We take refuge from boredom by distracting ourselves with all kinds of entertainment, shopping, any kind of things that prevent us from feeling what we might call bored. Often that comes down to just a general, a general anxiety or existential angst where we just can't sit still and we can't just be content with what we are. So we're always seeking something out there that we think is going to make us happy. So whether we call it that or not, that's the principle, that we are seeking refuge in things that are outside of us, hoping that they're going to make us happy, hoping that they're going to help us overcome a state of dissatisfaction or suffering. And often, I would like to come back around this word suffering that we use in Buddhism a lot. It is one way of translating the word dukkha from Sanskrit and Pali, but that word in English has a very intense feel. And in the traditional languages, it is more of a sense of dissatisfaction, discontentment, something like that. So if we're trying to overcome discontentment, we try all kinds of ways. And if we're really looking inward and seeing if those things actually work, we may find that they work for a moment, or they may distract us for a moment, but that they're actually not leading to any kind of lasting experience of happiness, that they're not actually changing the fundamental situation of discomfort. So when we talk about refuge in Buddhism, this whole topic has to be considered. What is discomfort? Why are we suffering? Why are we uncomfortable? What could we do about that? Are the methods that we've been employing effective or not? Can we actually gain happiness out there by perfecting some situation in the world? Can we buy our way into happiness? Can we buy our way into a situation where we no longer have to feel suffering or discomfort? So these are important things to actually contemplate for ourselves, because most of the time, whether we acknowledge it in that way or not, that's what we're doing. We're not addressing the fundamental causes of our discomfort, and we're actually just looking for some kind of solution out there that we think if we could get the right situation, if we could perfect the outer circumstances, if we could have the perfect job or buy that new piece of clothing or get the perfect house or have the perfect partner, that then everything will be great and we won't have to feel uncomfortable anymore. But it's a constant, we're in this cycle. We get to the top. You might think of the top as like that experience of, ooh, I got the thing I wanted. And for a moment, you're distracted by the dopamine fix or the temporary feeling of elation from getting the thing you wanted. But then you fall back down. That just becomes the norm. And then you find yourself right back where you were. Now that thing didn't actually solve the fundamental problem of discomfort or suffering or ignorance or whatever we want to talk about. It just kind of distracted me from it for a while, and then I find myself back in the same place. So these are all important things to think about, but also to kind of take that understanding with you and gain experience of. It's from this perspective that we gain something that is called, in the traditional language, renunciation, or you could say, renunciation is the most common translation, but really what it is a real wish to break free of this cycle. We go up, we think we got it really great, and then we just find ourselves back where we started. And, in one lifetime or even over the course of a few hours, we can experience that cycle. Or according to Buddhism, we've been doing this for many, many lifetimes, again and again and again and again, thinking that we can outsmart something which is maybe a more fundamental flaw in our own way of perceiving the world. We think we can somehow fix that by fixing things outside of us. That is a fundamentally flawed perspective, according to Buddhism. And to overcome that, then we have to find, if these other sources of refuge, like distraction, entertainment, even I hate to disparage like human relationship because it's a wonderful thing and we mostly need it, but it's not going to fix us, our fundamental misperception of reality. That fixing that, having the perfect partner, having the perfect relationship with your children or your parents or whatever, that can bring some relativistic comfort, but it's not going to change the fundamental issue, which is keeping you locked in this ongoing cycle of dissatisfaction. So, what is a source of refuge? What is something that could actually do that? Or maybe is there a person that ever figured that out? That's an important question to ask. And to a certain extent, this may be somewhat of a matter of faith, especially for people who are new to all of this. But according to Buddhism, the Buddha Shakyamuni, who is depicted in this painting here, he did that. He figured that out. He accomplished that state for himself. When I say for himself, I mean that he accomplished it. Another way of speaking is he accomplished it for the benefit of others. But, anyway, he did that. He became that. He became a being who had overcome that fundamental situation of suffering or discomfort. He became completely liberated from that ongoing cycle. And then having done that, he was able to explain how you could do that. So he could describe, the Buddha's first teaching after he attained enlightenment, something called the Four Noble Truths. So the Buddha could then describe, what is this state of suffering? What is this state of dissatisfaction? In very detailed terms, not just a few words, but there's different ways of talking about that fundamental state of dissatisfaction. And only one level is more of an overt sense of pain or suffering. The others are quite more subtle than that. So the Buddha was able to describe what is the situation of discomfort. And then, just knowing what it is helpful, but also we have to know why. Why did that happen? Because one of the Buddha's fundamental principles is to stop something from the cause. Once something's already happened, you can't really stop it because the cause is still in place. It's going to keep happening. As long as the seeds of suffering are already planted and all the conditions for that to ripen are still there, once the suffering's already there, you can take pain medicine, or you can dull that pain by distracting yourself with entertainment or alcohol or drugs or sex or whatever distracts you. But as long as that seed is still being planted for furthering that experience, it's going to keep ripening. It's going to keep happening. So if you want to stop something, you have to stop it from the cause, from the root. So that's the second of the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha taught that there is a situation of dissatisfaction, of suffering. These are the causes. So those causes, according to the Buddha, are something called karma and afflictive thoughts and emotions. I'm not going to get into super detail about talking about that right now. That's a whole other topic to go deep into the Four Noble Truths. However, just to give you an overview, this is like a way of talking about how or why maybe the Buddha is a reliable source of refuge rather than the way that we normally seek out refuge. So then the Buddha said, okay, that's the bad news, right? The bad news is there's suffering, and here's the causes of that suffering. The good news is there's an end of that suffering. There's something called the cessation of suffering. There's something called liberation or enlightenment. And you could do that. I did that, the Buddha said. I did it. You can do it too. So now, how can you do it? Then that's the fourth noble truth, the truth of the path. So the Buddha was able to set out a path for us to follow, for his followers to be able to discover that same state for themselves.